whenever they print more dollars, everybody suffers equally from that dilution. And this is one of the properties of fiat money that politicians use to their advantage. But that's one aspect that everyone is starting to think about because their savings are diluting. Their 401k doesn't look that great anymore. Used to be that you had a six-figure job that was considered amazing. Now it's like, I don't know, 100,000 might not be enough anymore, right? Like that actually doesn't sound that rich. Used to be that if you had $1 million, that was considered very rich. $1 million might get you like a third of a home in some suburb of San Francisco now. Like it's getting to the point where all the prices that we have in our heads, our mental models have to shift because of all the money printing that's going on. So that's one aspect where Bitcoin is definitely helping because this is your inflation hedge. There's a scarce amount of this stuff. You're not going to get diluted, and like whatever you think about like how the price is going to go over the long term, the thing that's scarcer does better, and that's what's happened with Bitcoin.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Changing the Tide. Today I have Jimmy Song on the show. He's a Bitcoin developer, educator, and entrepreneur. Been around a long time. He was very influential in my journey in 2017 as the block size wars were going on. Definitely followed a lot of what he was putting out there on Twitter, and just met him actually a couple weeks ago at Thank God for Bitcoin 2022, the event right before the main huge Bitcoin 2022 conference. So I'm excited to dive in, talk about Bitcoin and Lightning as freedom tools, and we also dive into both being Christians, some elements of theology and Bitcoin, and so had a lot of fun. Let's dive in. Jimmy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was great to meet you a couple weeks ago in Miami. We were at the Thank God for Bitcoin 2022, and nice to meet you in person.
Yeah, that was definitely a lot of fun, and there's a large community of Christian Bitcoiners, so seeing them all together and hanging out and doing what Christians do, I thought was awesome.
Yeah, me too. Super encouraging. Let's take a look at the Clark Moody Bitcoin dashboard here real quick. And there we go. Where is it? Okay, got it. All right. So we are recording at block height 732,458. The chain size is 456 gigabytes. Still able to run a node on a Raspberry Pi. There are 15,694 reachable Bitcoin nodes, those that we know of, and 54% of them are running on Tor. There's 3,655, a little bit over that, Bitcoin active in the Lightning Network, and quite a few nodes, 16,949, tons of channels, 82,259. And excited about all of that. When it comes to Bitcoin and Lightning, Jimmy, there's fewer people I'd rather be talking with about how it enables freedom. So let's dive in. You are an educator. You are a prolific educator, not only on the actual programming aspects of Bitcoin, your book, Programming Bitcoin, that you wrote a few years back. You do courses, but recently you have written books like Thank God for Bitcoin and Bitcoin and the American Dream. Could we maybe go back to how you came across Bitcoin and what jumped out at you about Bitcoin as a freedom tool?
Yeah, so I got into Bitcoin back in 2011, and when I first saw it, it was, the headline was something like, Internet-only currency Bitcoin has reached dollar parity, something like that, and I had no idea what that meant. And back then, like, very few people knew about it, and I was a programmer, so it came on a tech website, so I kind of assumed like, hey, this must be something tech related. what's an internet only currency anyway? I still remember it had a capital C in the name Bitcoin, like kind of showing you what it was like back then.
Yep.
So I looked into it, and one of the first things I found out was that there was a 21 million limit. And like just knowing what I know as a computer programmer, I was also a math major in college. And I had done some studying of Austrian economics because of what happened in 2008. You know, when I saw the 21 million limit, I was almost immediately taken. And I think part of it is all of the stuff that I knew that this was actually plausible, and that this could happen. And, you know, having that instinct for wanting something scarce that all humans have, I was like, okay, I have no idea if this is good or not, but if it has any potential whatsoever, you know, I think it's worth like getting a little bit. So I looked into how to get it, tried to buy using a credit card or PayPal, just could not find anything. And found out fairly quickly that like, you know, basically one of the only ways that you can get it, besides like trading for it like offline with somebody that you knew or something like that, was to go to a website in Japan called Mt. Gox, deposit money somehow there, and then buy it there. And that led me down the journey of trying to buy it, and I ended up not doing so because it was so complicated. But that's how I first got heard of Bitcoin. I was definitely the first among my peer group to learn about it. Most people that I talked to about it, including other programmers, were like, "Oh, okay," and just sort of thought it was a scam, and you know, didn't think much of it. But I was taken almost right away because of the scarce money aspect.
Interesting. I was just listening to one of your recent episodes. Actually, I think it's the first Bitcoin for Christians episode that you just did, where you talk a little bit about like going back to 2008 and your reflections on, wait, where did this $800 billion for the bailout come? Obviously, that probably played a part in the supply cap and why that was important to you.
Yeah. So, I mean, the weird thing about fiat money is that they can just sort of make as much as they want whenever they want. And I don't think I fully appreciated that until 2008. I always knew that the government was spending a lot of money, and there's always been a budget deficit as long as I've been alive, right? Like just every year there's somehow a shortfall, and it's like it's hand waved over exactly where that money comes from. 2008 really made it clear to me where that money comes from. The story I tell in that was how I was living in Boston in the late 90s and the early 2000s, and the big infrastructure project in Boston at the time was the Big Dig. And the Big Dig was a big deal. Like it was supposed to cost a couple billion, and you know it was to put a tunnel under the city so you could get to the airport faster. A couple $1 billion. It ended up costing like 20 billion, right? And everyone was like, "Oh my god, $20 billion!" And then we'd make fun of the cost overrun and say, who cares? Because it's the federal government paying for it, right? That's what we would say. And at that time, just that number, 20 billion, just looked insane to me, right? Like, how do you have $20 billion, and how can you be that off budget and not blow up everything? Like in any company, if you spent 10 times the amount of money that as your budget, you would blow up, right? Like you would go bankrupt, like investors would want their money back. How was it that we didn't? And like at the time, that was a lot of money, right? Like 20 billion in like the late 90s, early 2000s was considered like a tremendous. Now it's like, you know, valuation for a Series A startup or something. It's like insanely low now. So that was sort of like the context that I had in 2008. And then I heard the number $800 billion. It's like, where did this money come from? and finding out like exactly how the Fed worked, which is essentially they're the lenders of last resort. When no one is willing to lend to the government, they will lend to the government, and usually at a very, very good interest rate. And it turns out that the interest rate that they set is operative for pretty much everybody in the economy. Like everybody takes some sort of margin off of the Fed interest rate because that's where all loans sort of come from now. We're taught in school that loans come from somebody else's savings. That is just not the case anymore. It used to be. Used to be that you deposit $1,000 into the bank and then they would go and lend out the $1,000. But it's not that way anymore. In fact, they if you deposit $1,000, the bank for a long time had the right to lend out $10,000. And right now it's more like you can deposit $1 and they can lend out like millions. Like there's no reserve, there's no cap on there's no restriction on the reserve that you need, and they just print as much as they want. And Vijay Boyapati has this paper examining all this, and the way they do it is they just lend out as much as they can, and then they figure out the reserve stuff later, right? They'll either buy like treasuries or something like that. So it's kind of crazy, but this is how the whole system works. It's just oodles and oodles of money printing. So when I learned about that, like as a result of 2008, the 800 billion sort of led me down this rabbit hole of where's this money coming from? Who's it? Who's doing this? And then the next natural question is, okay, well, I guess that's okay, maybe, because we're all benefiting, right? Like we need the banks to be solvent. We need big infrastructure projects. Then it's like, that can't be right. Because then, like, why don't we just print $300 trillion? Then everyone can be a millionaire, right? Like, that's very easy. Like, there's 300 million people. Just give everyone $1 million, and that's $300 trillion. Why don't we just do that? And it's like, okay, then that wouldn't work, because then the dollar would be so debased that like nobody could do anything with the $1 million. It would probably cost you $1 million to get a car or something. So it turns out that that the system actually does hurt people, and examining that and going down the rabbit hole on that, and really thinking about, okay, how does the dollar work, and why is it the reserve currency of the world, and how that's ultimately what we wrote about in Thank God for Bitcoin and other books.
It's pretty incredible to think about it, because one of the most successful people I know in dollar terms is a friend of my father-in-law's. And we were hanging out one time, several of us, and he made mention that, what we were talking about Bitcoin. What is Bitcoin backed by? Because the US dollar is backed by gold. This was 2021. And I said, hey, this person's name, I won't say it, but that was 50 years. That ended 50 years ago. Literally has been operating his entire professional life thinking that the dollar was backed by something. And so it's incredible, I think, where we are right now with inflation hitting 8.5%, at least the inflation that they're telling us about, is waking people up, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, the CPI is 8.5% print or whatever, but we all know, anyone that's like gone shopping or whatever, like, yeah, that your groceries cost like almost double what they did 3 years ago, right? Like it's so. I went to Costco the other day and I had my first $1,000 grocery bill. Now I have a big family, right? I have 6 children, so okay. Our grocery bills are pretty high to begin with, but I don't think we've ever had like just a straight grocery bill that was greater than like $600 for years. And then, all this stuff happens, and then it's $1,000, and it's like, what? And like and our kids don't even have diapers anymore, right? Like diapers used to be the big thing. It's like, oh, that's like $60 or whatever. Now it's like, wait, this was $1,000, and it doesn't even feel like we got that much. And that's the pain that we're all feeling. Is inflation is a real monetary phenomenon, and it's like politicians like to blame greedy corporations or supply chain problems or whatever. But inflation is everywhere and always a monetary phenomenon. It's because of the supply of dollars getting bigger and not the result of some shenanigans here or there. Those would only be a localized and temporary phenomena. This is clearly a long-term trend. The last three prints of inflation, I think, were like 7.2, 7.8, and like now 8.5, something like that. So like that's just the CPI, and that's a heavily manipulated metric as we go into in the book. But yeah, like this is waking people up. They're like, wait, how does this work? Because we're not taught any of this in school. And like your father-in-law's friend, you know, most people have no idea how the monetary system works. They just sort of use money, you know, and do things with it without actually understanding the, you know, platform on which they're building.
Yeah. Well, it kind of ties in with the whole notion of objective truth, right? In the sense that CPI is not an objective truth measurement, no matter what they would want you to think. And maybe we could talk into that. Has the in some senses many objective truth points that Bitcoin offers into economics, did that draw you in? I mean, being a Christian, objective truth is a huge part, I think, of our faith. And so did that draw you in at all?
Well, the thing that drew me was the economics and technology. I happened to have been positioned so that I knew both of them. The Christianity stuff within Bitcoin, like I just did what I thought was kind of cool and interesting. The Christianity part came in later as I realized, like, okay, there's something changing in me as a result of getting into this stuff. And this is something that a lot of people experience once they get into Bitcoin, is what, you know, in Bitcoin we call lower time preference, what Christians would call prudence. It's just thinking about the future, thinking about how to plan for it and being wise about how you allocate your resources and so on. And for me, you know, getting into Bitcoin and realizing sort of like the incredible store of value that it was, you know, starting in 2013 when I really started coding in it and understanding how it all worked, that brought me to a place where I was, you know, trying to save a lot more than I was. And it's not like I wasn't a saver before, but the manner in which I saved and the focus that I had towards you know, what I was doing changed significantly. And like I said, I'm not like, you know, a spendthrift or anything like that. I'm not going out there and like, you know, partying every day or anything. I've never been that person. But I was sort of like that cheapskate that would try to save $5 on like, you know, free shipping or something like that, like searching for 20 minutes. That calculation started to change as I got into Bitcoin, and particularly when I started my own business. It's like, okay, if I'm spending 20 minutes to save $5, I'm really working at $15 an hour. What's my time worth? My time's worth more than $15 an hour, I can tell you that. And and so it's not a logical or reasonable thing to be doing. And if I am planning for the future, well, what do I want to spend my time on? Well, if it were purely monetary, it would be, you know, whatever would make me the most money. But that's not fulfilling either. And it's given me sort of like this much more considered, you know, value of my time, right? Like instead of just save money at any cost, because understanding money in some deep way helps me to understand what my time is worth. And doing that, like, leads you to, I think, living a much better life. And ultimately that led me down this road of a lot more discipline, spiritual discipline, especially in my life. And doing that, I think, you know, and I started noticing sort of similar things among the Christian Bitcoiners I knew. And yeah, that led us to ultimately write the book, I guess, and start sort of congregating this community.
Yeah. Yeah, because you have this book that reaches into, I think, the Christian sphere with Thank God for Bitcoin. Noticed yesterday, maybe it was yesterday, at least the tweet, I noticed that you're offering a course now down in El Salvador. I believe it's this summer. Stacy Herbert tweeted this out, and you're basically offering a programming Bitcoin course there.
Yeah, so Stacy reached out to me like literally yesterday, like right after Easter service or whatever, and she's like, "Hey, like I want to do this thing. What would it take?" I was like, "Well, I can just put in an application up and we can do that." And she tweeted it out and it went crazy. We have a ton of applicants, so looks like we'll be doing it, and she's going to secure funding from a lot of Bitcoin people to train developers in El Salvador. But that was something that she wanted to do because she's seeing a lot of altcoiners sort of coming into the country, trying to take over the narrative a little bit, and that's honestly something that Bitcoiners have been fighting against for a very long time. Is the altcoin narrative tends to overwhelm the Bitcoin narrative in many ways. And this is where we get words like cryptocurrency instead of Bitcoin. And a lot of people want to sound more inclusive or think that this is a whole category when it's really just, Bitcoin is one thing and altcoins are something completely different. And that's something that I applaud her for, and I'm trying to figure out a way to go down there for a week with my whole family or something like that. But yeah, it's an initiative to help the country of El Salvador because they are rapidly Bitcoinizing, and we want to be helping that along because there is sort of like the other article that you might have seen is what's happening in El Salvador with the IMF and all that. The IMF is throwing all sorts of FUD towards El Salvador. They're cause for concern because they're starting their own currency, and all these like sort of mainstream stories that are like subtle digs or throwing shade at El Salvador, saying, oh, we found this Pegasus thing on like 30 opposition cell phones within El Salvador. And it's like Pegasus is like on all sorts of other phones too, but they just reported this one to make it seem like it was something completely extraordinary to essentially make Bukele look terrible or whatever. I wrote this in the El Salvador piece that I wrote. There's a spiritual dimension to Bitcoin. There's a spiritual dimension to money in the sense that money is a way in which, countries and people all get oppressed. And this is the spiritual oppression that I think Ephesians 6:12 talks about. These are the forces of darkness, the spiritual forces of wickedness or whatever. These are it. And I truly feel that like one of the reasons why El Salvador is thriving is because they're actually a really Christian country. If you've ever been down there, you talk to the people there, it's about half Catholic, half evangelical Christian. But it's like every politician I met, they were like very quick to tell me that they're Christian to me. One of the translators told me we're a very Christian country. We're a pro-life, pro-Christian country. Like, you need to know this about this place. I mean, could it be that Bitcoin is a blessing into this country because they're following God? I like that. That's something that I ask myself. It's like, yeah, possibly. And I've talked to a bunch of people there, and the blessings are not coming from the people that you would expect. It's like coming from the kids and stuff. Like that whole Bitcoin Beach movement started because they were paying the kids, and then the parents were converted as a result of the kids. This is happening all over El Salvador, right? Like the party in power, they're mostly young people, relatively speaking, for a country like that. The old guard, the opposition parties, are all people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. Bukele's parties, mostly people in their 30s, right? Like this, there's something real about this movement, and I want to contribute to it. I want to make this a place that's successful. I think we all realize as Bitcoiners that if this place is successful, this is a model that can get copied all over the place. And if it does, then we're going to see some incredible, like human flourishing from that, just like we are right now in El Salvador. All over these sort of developing countries, which have been spiritually oppressed or monetarily oppressed for so long.
Wow. So that's, yeah, because what you get, not only is the IMF flooding El Salvador, but it seems like mainstream media does it. It's the murder capital of the world. It's, everything is violence and there's nothing good coming out of El Salvador. Even, this Bitcoin thing is just a bad idea, and it's going to, even U.S. politicians who created that, I don't know if it was an actual like bill or just it's something they put out on the House, but saying, hey, we're going to research the effects that Bitcoin in El Salvador could have on the United States.
Yeah, it really feels like coordinated, right? Like, because there are all these stories that are just sort of coming out of nowhere almost. This is the thing, like the IMF is essentially an extension of the Fed. They get their funding from the U.S. They use that money to give out loans. So it's money printed from nothing, used to give out loans. And then when the loans don't get paid back, then they get to take all the resources of the country. And this is how the U.S. has practiced monetary imperialism all over the world, but particularly in Central and South America. Europe has done something similar with Africa. And China is now doing something similar with Africa and many other Southeast Asian countries. Like this is has been sort of like the global playbook. It's, imperialism doesn't require guns and soldiers anymore. It's currency and monetary, using loans and all these like tricky things as a way to grab all of the resources of an entire region. And it's oppressed these places. Like there's sort of almost a racist sort of perspective on these developing countries, saying, well, they can't get their stuff together because they're lazy or stupid or something like that. No, it's because the monetary incentives are completely misaligned. You're like, I think about the people in El Salvador. Well, like the best and the brightest are illegally immigrating to the U.S. and I don't know, building homes for people or something like that, instead of building homes in El Salvador. Like, how's that a good thing? Like, you're taking literally their best resources and using them to build your own country instead of letting them build their own. And this is essentially what's happened all over the place. And of course, they're not going to be able to develop if their best and the brightest are, essentially put into monetary slavery and put to work for the country that's conquered them. That's done in sort of like a really backwards way, but that's essentially what it amounts to. Instead, like if they were building all those homes that the illegal immigrants in the U.S., if they just built them in their own backyard, like how much more flourishing would you have in those places? The natural state of all of the most people is building stuff, right? Like, because this is how you make a living and so on. But if those resources are going to other countries, then you're not building things in your own home country. And that's what's kind of exciting about this whole El Salvador experiment is a lot of those people that left are trying to come back because they're like, what? Wait, what? There's opportunity here? I could actually build a business? Yeah, let's go back. There's going to be money available to go build Bitcoin City near a volcano. Yeah, I know how to do construction. I'm going to come back. I'm gonna get some of these government contracts. I want to build out homes here and make things really nice. I've learned a thing or two the last 20 years. Let's go do this, right? Like that's where we want to be, but that hasn't been happening the last 50 years because we've essentially taken a lot of the capital from these poor places, and I'm speaking we in terms of not just people in the U.S., but pretty much anyone in the Western world or even China at this point. Yeah, you're taking the resources of poorer countries for yourself, and pretending that you're not like stealing from them in some way. But that's essentially what's been happening.
Yeah, and not just in El Salvador, like you mentioned, Africa. My friend Cal Casa, who's down in Austin, and he is from Ethiopia originally, and he talks about the importance of the reason he's in Bitcoin and why he's so interested in Bitcoin for Africa is because he wants someone in Addis Ababa to like earn the same via Bitcoin that someone in Miami or Austin or San Jose would do, because the best and the brightest in a lot of these oppressed places leave, and they go to somewhere where there's greater opportunity. And he says, that was the story of my family, but I wish the opportunity had been in Ethiopia. And you can insert country's name here. There's probably 100 of them where the opportunity could be better if the system were just slightly different. And Bitcoin represents that opportunity.
Well, it's not just the system that would be slightly. It has to be the money that has to be different. Because if like when you have the monetary system that we do now, you have constant debasement of your own money through your central bank, and your central bank is dependent on another central bank, generally within the sphere of influence that you happen to be under, and like all the workers go there, right? It's crazy. Like there are workers in Indonesia that end up working inside the UAE for months at a time, and like they're helping build Dubai, right? Like, and not their own homes or their own, like building roads in their own country. This is a form of monetary imperialism, and it's done and it's seen as better because they're quote unquote doing it voluntarily, but it's anything but voluntary if the money is completely manipulated and fraudulent. And this is the thing that I don't think a lot of people have thought about, especially Christians, because our focus is on how we need to live like here and now or something like that. And if you think about missions at all, it's about how we need to save these backwards people from whatever they're doing. It's not thinking at all about the injustice of the monetary system that's caused them to be in the sort of under the thumb of whatever monetary imperialism that they're under. That's a big deal. And if you can help them remove that, if you can help them realize real justice, and this is what I call like the real social justice. This is not imagined slights against your gender pronoun. This is like actual real money and livelihood that is being taken away from a lot of these people. That's what's required is for all of them to have real money so that they're not under this oppression and they're not so subject to these other countries.
Yeah, to even take it to your point, oftentimes monetary imperialism, the code word in like newspeak, the mainstream media, is globalism. But true globalism under Bitcoin standard would probably look 180 degrees different.
Oh, extremely different. I mean, I'm reading about like just fossil fuels, right? And this is something that's been completely distorted. But what happens under some sort of monetary imperialism is that these countries can't develop coal or natural gas power plants, right? That's not allowed. And the thing is, like, that they might have plenty of it, but they won't let them develop it because, hey, it's bad for your environment or something like that. And they're like, yeah, but otherwise we're just gonna go burn wood in our house, right, to stay warm. And like they're essentially prevented from economically developing. They're kept under oppression. And of course, then they're going to have to go over to another country to work or something like that. And you get the best workers, the smartest people leaving the country and essentially contributing to the development of other countries instead. But if they actually were sovereign, if these countries actually, didn't have to depend on IMF loans or help from other places, then what they would be able to do is, okay, well, screw what you say. Like, we're gonna do what we need to do as a country, and okay, we're gonna build these coal power plants so we can actually have electricity. We can run machines. We can build roads. We can, make hospitals. We won't have intermittent power anymore. We'll have steady power, and that means that we can, like, have more businesses. You can actually run businesses, right? Like, if you have steady electricity, you can have better infrastructure. Like, this is the development that's being prevented at so many levels, largely because of the money. Like, if you had that, if you didn't have this ability to ultimately veto whatever these countries wanted to do through this loan sharking thing that a lot of these countries do, which I would call spiritual oppression, then they would be able to thrive, but they can't.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me that, like, this keeps going and we don't recognize this as a horrible injustice, a deep way of keeping people down, and like a spiritual contagion on the entire world.
Yeah. Wow. Well, to maybe dive into a little bit on the Bitcoin and the American dream and how you are trying to orange pill politicians. I mean, if you're in the Bitcoin Twitter sphere at all, you have camps that have developed, which are the state, like Bitcoin without the state. We don't want anything to do with politicians. And that's a loud camp. And there's also a camp that says we need to work with them. And clearly with you and the group that wrote Bitcoin and the American Dream, I think you fall more in that latter camp. So it'd be interesting to hear what was the decision to work with and try to orange pill the political establishment, let's say.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would think, like, this is the difference within Christians of, like, do you engage with the world or not? Right? Yeah. You definitely could choose to, I don't know, I guess be a hermit or a monk or something like that, and only sort of stay in a holy huddle or something. But at least for me, like, being in the world but not of the world is a very important thing for Christians to be able to do, because I mean, first of all, like Christ says, there are great rewards, right? Like, if you're able to win people over to Christ through whatever it is that you do in the real world, great, you've won people to Christ. That's awesome, and you've expanded the kingdom of God. If you get persecuted, God also says, hey, you have rewards in heaven, okay? Like, don't worry about that. And I will pay you back way more than whatever you put in. So it's just good, like, cost benefit, right? And that the only real danger of doing that is becoming worldly yourself. And that's the thing that you have to guard against as a Christian. And if you have the right spiritual disciplines, I think that's and Christ teaches us all of this stuff. This is how you should pray. That, when you fast, go do this, and all that stuff. There are tools out there to make it so that you can be in the world but not of the world. And hopefully you're taking those things seriously if you're a Christian. Similarly, I think as Bitcoiners, you want to hold on to the ethic of, saving and all of the good stuff that comes out of low time preference, prudent behavior. But, like, you need to engage with the world too. And if you get people orange pilled, then great. Like, you've expanded the Bitcoin sphere. And if people start hating you, well, at least you know who they are, and you can like sort of work around them and try to, win other ways and so on. So for me, that's how I'm kind of viewing this, and we're finding that there are way more allies than we thought. A lot of people are interested, largely because our numbers are growing, and it's grown very, very quickly. At least in the United States, I think with DCG's latest report, something like 26 million people in the U.S. have some exposure to Bitcoin. It might be through, GBTC. It might be through some fund that has a little bit of an allocation to Bitcoin. Maybe they own some MicroStrategy. I don't know, but it's like 26 million. That's not a small number. That's almost 10% of the U.S. So that ends up being actually like a significant voting block. So a lot of politicians are certainly interested. So our strategy there is to, let them know who we are, what Bitcoiners want, and so on. Their impression of us, I think, so far is you're a bunch of drug buying, anarcho-capitalist, libertarian finance bros or something like that. And one of the things that we wanted to point out in the book is actually no, that used to be that was true, say in 2012, 2013. It's definitely not true anymore. And if you actually look at the demographics, Black people are way more likely to, well, not way more, they're more likely to own Bitcoin than white people are. Now, why is that? Why would that be? Because traditionally, Black Americans are way more Democrat than Republican. And a lot of people thought this was like sort of a more libertarian Republican thing. Well, it's because they've had their property stolen from them. So they stuff like that matters. So,
yeah.
There are lots of constituencies within Bitcoin that most of these politicians just have no clue about. So we wanted to give them an idea of who we are, what we want, what policy goals that we might have, and tell us whether they're for us or against us. And that's half the game in DC, is knowing who's your friend and who's your enemy. And once you have that, then at least the battle lines are drawn. You can go do something with it. Hopefully we'll succeed in getting more people to our side than before.
Yeah. Well, I think you just masterfully, for the past 20 minutes or so, unpacked the prosperity portion of this show, which is like Bitcoin on Lightning enabling freedom and prosperity. Could we talk in a little bit, because we had a conversation in Miami and you talked to me about talking to companies and churches and nonprofits and the like about there's actually two prongs to this. There's the inflation hedge and there's the censorship hedge. So how do you see Bitcoin and Bitcoin on Lightning, for instance, helping in that direction?
Yeah, so these both have come up in the last year. Obviously, we've already talked about inflation. The dollar is expanding at a tremendous rate. So if you look at the M2 money supply from the beginning of, from January of 2020 to now, it's gone from something like 15.5 trillion to something like 22 trillion at this point. That's a really large expansion, like 30-40%. Within like 2.5 years, something like that, or less than 2.5 years. You annualize that ends up being like 15%, 20%, something like that. That's the real inflation that we're looking at. So
yeah,
that's going to start scaring people, because like we were talking about, your grocery bill is going to be much higher. Price that you're paying for your used car is going to be higher. The price that you're paying for homes is higher. Pretty much anything that you would want to buy, like, it's going up in price. And even stuff that you wouldn't want to buy, it's still going up in price. And everyday staples are going up in price. Just this is a big problem, because anything that you've saved in the dollar is basically been stolen, right? Like, the value of your dollar has been stolen. So what do you do? So that's one aspect that I think everyone identifies with. Bitcoin is an inflation hedge. Doesn't matter if you're a company or whatever. Like, the thing about the dollar is that it's uniformly debased, right? Like, whenever they print more dollars, everybody suffers equally from that dilution. And this is one of the properties of fiat money that politicians use to their advantage. But that's one aspect that everyone is starting to think about because their savings are diluting. Their 401k doesn't look that great anymore. Used to be that you had a 6-figure job that was considered amazing. Now it's like, I don't know, 100,000 might not be enough anymore, right? Like that actually doesn't sound that rich. Used to be that if you had $1 million, that was considered very rich. $1 million might get you like a third of a home in some suburb of San Francisco now. Like it's getting to the point where all the prices that we have in our heads, our mental models have to shift because of all the money printing that's going on. So that's one aspect that where Bitcoin is definitely helping because this is your inflation hedge. There's a scarce amount of this stuff. You're not going to get diluted, and like whatever you think about like how the price is going to go over the long term, the thing that's scarcer does better, and that's what's happened with Bitcoin. The other aspect is the confiscation aspect, and this is I think brought home for a lot of people with the Canadian truckers, because there was a GoFundMe that was like $10 million donated to Canadian truckers, and and GoFundMe just said, no, we're not going to do it. There was another one where the Canadian government started seizing the bank accounts of people that tried to do it. The financial system, or the rails that everything runs on, are completely centralized. That means that there's somebody that's going to be able to censor your transaction, confiscate your transaction, whatever it is, because they sit in the middle of that transaction. When you're when you're giving a donation to a Canadian trucker through the traditional financial system, there's somebody in the middle that can stop it, and they have, and that's kind of the point. It's terrible because you don't really have sovereignty over your own property. There's no way for you to go give it to them because there are all these places that like sort of prevent it. With Bitcoin, we found out that you're not subject to that. In fact, like there was a bunch of money sent through Bitcoin to those Canadian truckers. Many of them received it. There are videos that you can see online of them receiving like $8,000 in Bitcoin. It's like, thank you so much. Wow. And they're very emotional about it. But this is the ability that everyone's starting to have to think about, because if you are a Christian, we're starting to get persecuted right now. Now, I did mention earlier that we are building up treasures in heaven when we're doing that. But, if you can help it, you should try to minimize the damage that they're able to do through their persecution. And certainly, they might come after your money, right? Like at some point, if you don't have transgender bathrooms in your church, and if you're not doing homosexual marriages in your church, or polyamorous marriages in your church, or allowing professors that say pedophilia is good or something, like it's just gonna get more extreme, right? Like they're gonna be like, okay, now we're gonna just take away your bank account. What are you gonna do about it, huh? This is the level of control that they have, and it's not necessarily in like that, right? Where hey, we're gonna make you do transgender bathrooms. So it's often a lot more subtle. It's okay, you're gonna apply for a PPP loan. Let's see all your financials. Let's see what you've done and make sure that you've complied with everything. Because hey, if we're gonna print all this money and you're gonna go under unless we unless we bail you out. And I just looked like a couple of months ago at who received PPP loans, and I looked up every church I can think of in the Austin area. Pretty much all of them took PPP money. Like that tells you like how incentivized they are to conform to the state when they're able to get that free money. Now, part of that free money is, the government sort of making up for the fact that they've just inflated or whatever, and, the fact that they shut these places down. But at the same time, it's now you're dependent on them, and there's a strong incentive to obey the state in a lot of stuff. in which case the church becomes sort of an arm of the state. And that's definitely something that biblically we're not supposed to do. We're not supposed to be a puppet of the state. We're supposed to be, loyal to God. And this is something that every church needs to think deeply about is, okay, are you going to keep obeying the state? Because they're just going to ask for more stuff. And every step is going to be justifiable. But, when you're actually doing, gay weddings and relabeling your bathrooms, like, how you're going to be asking, how the heck did we get here? Well, it was the money that you took. And it's the subtle steps that you took many, many years before of conforming to this stuff. And to be honest, like COVID was just like sort of the last step. There were many steps before where the American church conform to the state and sort of let the state dictate what they could do, because they got tax subsidies. They had, I think, a 501c3 designation, and they were able to essentially like need the government to approve a bunch of stuff. And if you're beholden to the state like that, you're not going to say no when they ask you for something, because you need their cooperation later. So, in those two respects, I think, Bitcoin can help churches actually be independent of the state, which we really honestly need to do, because the state is becoming devilish. It's becoming demonic. The way I see the world, and maybe because I'm in Bitcoin, like the monetary forces are spiritual forces, and they are deeply, deeply embedded in government. It's not something you can just extract by like taking out 3 people. This is a part of the deep state, like what we call the deep state, the bureaucratic class that's actually like controlling everything. Well, guess how they're funded? It's through fiat money, and the only solution I see to being able to fight that in any reasonable way is to have a money that's completely outside of their control, and that's Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's kind of, wow. There was a lot there, so thanks for that, Jimmy. It kind of even takes me back to, I was in high school when the shock and awe in Baghdad, when essentially we invaded Iraq, and there were a lot of churches that stood behind that decision, and now you look back on it and you wonder, okay, we know we were lied to. There were no WMDs there. And so what was it about the church cheering on, much less war, but cheering on actions of the state? And I think there is an intertwining there due to 501c3 and other things. That's really fascinating. I imagine a world in which, and I think Bitcoin and Lightning are enabling this, and there are ways we haven't thought about it, but for the ability for a Christian in, say, the United States or Canada or the West to be able to send directly to a missionary in the 1040 window, the forbidden areas of the world, to be a Christian directly from one phone to another. And I see that as this emerging reality that Bitcoin and Lightning enables. Do you have, I know programming Bitcoin is the name, not programming Lightning, but as you see the development of Lightning, how do you see that helping in this as well, if at all?
Yeah, Lightning's interesting because it has some really nice privacy properties, as you've hinted at.
Bless you.
Yeah, thank you. So the privacy properties are that there's no on-chain stuff, right? Other than your opening and closing transaction, all the stuff you do in between, there's, it's sort of like there and then not there afterwards. And unless you happen to be one of the the parties at either end, you actually don't know very much, because there are protocols that sort of wrap it in what we call an onion, right? Like it's each layer, you have to unwrap it and send it to the next one, and something like that. It's more like one of those Russian dolls or something. But basically, that's how Lightning works. Especially if you use something like submarine swaps, where you send in Lightning, but then the end party will then send a Bitcoin to a Bitcoin address. That can give you enormous levels of privacy. And this is the thing about Bitcoin is that because of that level of privacy and the self-sovereignty, you have money that isn't controlled by the state. And this is a huge thing, especially with people that are doing human rights stuff, which is why I've been working with the Human Rights Foundation. For a lot of human rights activists, what you find is that your accounts are shut down right away as soon as you do something that the government doesn't like. And a lot of those human rights activists are pastors and people from church. So that's a way in which you can get them money. As far as like the 1040 window and using it to fund missionaries, yeah, those are great things. And if you try to use the traditional finance system, this is a Herculean task oftentimes, just because there's so many intermediaries. You have no idea when it's going to get there. And that's an inefficiency that exists in the system because there's just not that much demand for doing all of that. Using Bitcoin, that can definitely relieve a lot of these things. There's a pastor in Florida that I was talking to, and he funds church plants in Cuba. Wow. And he funds them using Bitcoin because he can actually send it without having to try to get a bank in Canada to send it through, because there's no U.S. financial institution that'll let him send money to Cuba. So right. There's definitely a huge opportunity there where we can use Bitcoin to fund a lot of this. But for me, the bigger thing is, being faithful to God, specifically in monetary matters, because the reason why you can't get money to these places or have difficulty getting money to these places is because the monetary systems are all rigged like in the devil's favor, right? Like uprooting this system should be one of our priorities if you really actually want to help these people and win them over for Christ.
Yeah. So why? Okay, you're gonna laugh, and I know plenty of answers to this, but I want to hear from you. Like, why Bitcoin and let's say Bitcoin on Lightning and not some altcoin or some like Jesus coin that a group of Christians decides to create and mint themselves, and try to accomplish the same thing.
Yeah, and they're free to try, but it's going to be centralized, right? Like whoever issues the coin is essentially in charge, and that's what every altcoin is. It's a centralized coin. It's not different than central bank backed fiat money. And Bitcoin's very different because Satoshi Nakamoto left, and we have this decentralized development. It's always backwards compatible. The characteristic of every altcoin ever since is that the creator has basically controls the coin. The foundation that they establish controls the coin. If somebody's in control of the coin, then you ultimately they're the ones that are going to get regulated, conquered, or whatever. So if Iran doesn't like whatever this network is doing, then they can go and try to like arrest that person or take that person out or something like that. You really can't do that with Bitcoin. There's no center in Bitcoin. But if it has a center, then it's vulnerable to being taken over, to all the things that we're vulnerable to in the fiat system, including inflation, confiscation, and all this other stuff.
Cool. Yeah. I've had conversations with a number of people who I think are getting into understanding Bitcoin, but they're at the very beginning of their journey. So I think that'll be super helpful in pointing them in the right direction. So, well, yeah, Jimmy, this has been a fantastic conversation. Really appreciate you coming on. What are you excited to what are you working on next, what do you want to point people to go learn more about you? Tell us more about that.
Well, so I'm working on a bunch of stuff. I have the columns are fairly new. I'm hoping to write more of them and orange pill Christians. Obviously I just came back from the Miami stuff and I'm still sort of recovering. There's a bunch of projects that I think I'm starting to spin up, which I'm not ready to announce yet. But the El Salvador programming blockchain course will probably happen sometime during the summer. I am going to be at Oslo Freedom Forum in May to talk about Bitcoin with a bunch of human rights activists. But yeah, there's also the Bitcoin Today Coalition, which I'm part of, and we're trying to lobby senators and members of Congress towards being more orange pill. So those are it.
Cool. And then that article that's in Christian Post.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So Christian Post is where I've been publishing sort of like my Bitcoin for Christian stuff, and then I'm recording it as a podcast on various places.
Cool. And then where can people find you on social media? I know you run several podcasts all under the Bitcoin Fixes This umbrella.
Yeah. So my Twitter is Jimmy Song, and you can always find my content there. I have a YouTube channel, Off Chain with Jimmy Song. And that's like spread as a podcast on Anchor and wherever your favorite podcasting app is. I also have a newsletter, jimmysong.substack.com. You can find all of this information at my website, programmingbitcoin.com, which is the title of my first book.
Cool. Well, awesome, Jimmy. Thanks again for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
Man, that was an awesome discussion with Jimmy. Really appreciate his insights, specifically around censorship and inflation hedges, as well as just how he got into Bitcoin, examining the larger network overall and the larger place that it plays inside the worldwide monetary system. Really interesting to think about the fact that your shares of US dollars or some other government printed currency dilute as more is included. And so just a basic concept that if you've ever worked at a company that you get to take some sort of equity in and it acquires or merges with another company, your shares dilute. The pool grows larger, and so maybe that percentage on a larger amount is better if the company increases its valuations. And even though you have a smaller percentage because of the larger amount, you get perhaps more than you had previously. That's not necessarily the way it works in government currency. So in any case, that was awesome to hear. And well, I guess it works that way if you're an asset holder, but not if you're not. So really interesting to hear Jimmy frame it in the concept of justice and biblical justice specifically. So I'm very thankful for Jimmy coming on to this podcast. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. Some thanks for people who streamed sats over to me. At Nick on Fountain, from Tim K at Ellen Pay, session 21, the last one that I just uploaded. He said, supreme knowledge, and streamed hundreds of sats. Thanks so much. And then at Chad Farrow boosted me, or actually I should say streamed me 1,470 sats. What a guy. Really appreciate you. And earlier this week as well, there was a at witty username 30 who streamed me quite a few sats as well. Really appreciate that. I think that's the same at witty username 30 Twitter handle who I believe is involved with the KC Bitcoin meetup. So really appreciate your witty username 30 at Chad Farrow and at Nick on Fountain. You guys rock. Thanks for supporting the show. with that, again, you can like and subscribe on all of the legacy podcast platforms, but I have really moved towards pushing everyone towards podcasting 2.0 enabled apps. And what are those? Well, there's some names out there. The ones that I throw out there are Fountain, Breeze, Podverse, as well as Cast-O-Matic, but there are quite a few others. You can find those at newpodcastapps.com, as well as podcastindex.org. And Podcast Index is the official kind of group that is heading up this open source project on Podcasting 2.0. So make sure that you stream them some sats as well. I'm planning on opening up some more, a greater percentage of the stats that are streamed to me to Podcast Index as part of the split. And thanks for all that they do. It's a grassroots effort, and value for value is fantastic. I'm loving it. I'm loving being a part of it. And so if you really want to support this show or podcastindex.org, please stream stats on one of those lightning-enabled podcast apps. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, keep stacking sats and stream a few to your favorite podcasters.